Where were you born, Norrie?
I was born in Dorchester.
Whereabouts?
The hotel stood next to the General Post Office, and I remember hearing them stamping the letters at night, and I'd go to sleep hearing the stamping going on. Underneath was a shop and bakery and dining rooms where the Hardy players held their rehearsals. My mother went into Dorchester to live when she was married, and she was quite wonderful. She more or less ran the business, which I think was wonderful from the point of view. Anybody brought up in the country, usually very shy. But it was my father who was shy, not my mother.
Can you sort of describe what Dorchester was like on a market day, or not just sort of on an ordinary day?
Yes, I can. I do have a photograph of some of us right on the top of the flat roof of the hotel, looking over Dorchester. And then it was inside the walks, which the walks were planted where the Roman walls once were. And that was Dorchester then, not all the great spread around that it is now.
But you used to hear the market sounds, didn't you?
Oh, the market, yes. The market and Poundbury Fair. They were quite big events. Market every Wednesday. And actually you would see the sheep being driven through Dorchester and the cows and so on. And when you got up in the market, I'm talking now, I'm going right back nearly the beginning of the century, there would be farm carts and no cars. And you would hear, well, you couldn't hear yourself speak in the market because you had all the auctioneers yelling, trying to talk each other out, as it were. And you had the horses neighing and the cows and all the farmland noises brought to Dorchester every week. But everything came to the market to be sold. Not only that, the butter came, there was a covered building there for that, still is there, I think. And everything on the farm would come there for sale every week. So you had absolutely fresh vegetables, and you had eggs only in the spring. And yes, you had rabbits, dead rabbits caught on the farms brought in. Chicken also killed and brought in ready. And you also had the live chicken and cockerels, and if you know what cockerels are like, they make an awful noise. They help to make the noise. Yes. And you had a collection, I remember, of Jews come down to get something cheap. And I don't think they were very popular. Poundbury Fair, I remember actually picking harebells, little blue harebells on it. It was entirely green then. And you would go by the barracks, the keep, I think it is now, and on the other side were the soldiers' quarters, and that was Poundbury. Nothing else. And I wish it were the same now.
Where did you go to school, Norrie?
Oh, Casterbridge School in Dorchester. It was a private school, but it's a very good one, and it got you as far as the Cambridge Junior in those days. And then my sister married, and at Bedminster there was then a very good grammar school for boys and girls. And it was arranged that I went down there to go through, and I was there a term and a half. And in that time, yes, the exam was held for the, what was it now? Oxford Senior, that's it.
All right.
And I was lucky I got through just by the skin of my teeth, minus some of the, anything to do with algebra, trigonometry, or things like that, I just didn't know. I had to take precis writing instead. And a lot of them, although they were far better educated than I was at that year for some unknown reason, and various school people have told me it was correct. If you failed in French, you failed the exam. And a lot of them failed in French for the simple reason they had a very bad teacher. They weren't allowed to speak in the class. But yes, when I went down there first, it was a Monday morning, and he pounced on me and said, did I go to church yesterday? Oh, not knowing what he'd said, I said yes. And he said, well, what did you go there for? And I said, I shouldn't have gone from. He said, did you go there to pray? I said, no. Oh, I gave all the wrong answers to every question. Of course, the rest of the kids, they were very, very amused afterwards and told me what I'd said. But it seemed to me very unfair that year, because, well, I mean, just one language to fail the whole exam. But you see, I wasn't allowed to go on to college because another sister married, and my mother kept on to me to take her place. And I often think there's several times in my life when things could have been very different, through no fault of my own. Well, that's life, isn't it? Well, grammar schools were usually for boys, but this one at Bedminster was more or less, it helped mainly with agriculture in some way, but it was for mixed, for girls and boys. And it was a very, very good school. It's comprehensive now, of course. I think if I'd gone on to college, it would have been for history. I was always very, very fond of history. Just love that. I remember the first time I went to London. I met a press reporter, and I didn't know who it was. And she questioned me and so on, and afterwards one of the other players said, did you enjoy talking to that lady? I said, yes, she was very interesting. She asked me about where I wanted to go, and all. I said that usual, I suppose, Tower of London and things like that, because I loved history. And he said with a twinkle in his eye, she was a reporter. Oh, I never wanted reporters ever since. But I've had quite a few. But no, I don't.
It was about Gertrude. She was asking questions, wasn't it?
Yes.
She was asking.
Oh, yes. Oh, I left that out. Yes, she was. Yes, and I quite innocently said that she couldn't be in it because she was having a baby. And you see, in those days, she didn't want it all known, but apparently I tried to cover her up more than she minded. I've been to London, when was it? Oh, it must have been in the 60s, that was the last time. And we were stuck on Westminster Bridge for about 20 minutes of a very hot day. And my husband said, I hope I'll never see London again. We never did. I loved going over the Tower and Westminster Abbey. Yes, but I came away thinking, oh, I'd hate to live there. So in those days, Dorchester consisted of small private businesses, and everybody lived above it. You didn't get many thieves in those days. You certainly didn't get what you've got today. I always remember Dorchester on a Sunday, and the church bells would ring out all over there were several churches, one or two have been pulled down. And then there would be dead silence, the bells would stop. And you'd have absolute silence. You could hear the birds in Walt's trees. But everybody would be either in church or cooking Sunday lunch. And there was nobody walking in the streets, and certainly no traffic going on. You can't visualise a town like that, can you? I remember it very well.
What else do you think, Norrie? What are the differences between the world of your childhood and now?
Well,
Passing.
it wouldn't be a bad idea if the world could go back to what it used to. Because I think that the world is going to cause its own end. Because, I mean, already it's melting at the poles. And all of that water, well, I mean, we're an island, we could just go in under just like that. And I think that could happen. Oh, the
Very
pace
fast.
of everything. It's all too fast now.
How about, you know, everybody calls each other by their Christian names now. You were saying nobody did that. It was all
Oh, not
Mr. and
then,
Mrs.
no.
Do,
No, it was all, well, even on the programmes of Tess, it's Mr. and Mrs.
do you think that was better?
Mm,
Do you think that was better when they had more respect?
in a way, yes. Yes, I do. And certainly you wouldn't go down through the street eating something out of a bag. And the gentlemen raised their hats to the ladies. And the ladies always wore hats. Yes. It was an entirely different world to the one I'm in now.
Do you still have a hat and wear a hat? Or have you
No, I
abandoned
don't
it?
wear a hat. No. It's much easier not to.
But you miss them. You miss them, though. They're a fine thing.
I never did like wearing hats too much.
They do.
Not really. No. I thought it was a bit formal.
And it was so quiet. You said the other day it was such a quiet world, wasn't it?
Oh, yes. Yes.
And also the
Dare I
difference-
say it, perhaps a more intelligent world. I remember my mother pointing out to me, there's Mr. Floyer going down there in his carriage. And Mr. Floyer seemed to have a mouth all across his face. That's what I seem to remember. Isn't it funny, childhood memories? Yes. And of course, he lived at Stafford House. Yeah. I went to the cemetery. I was taken to the cemetery a year or two ago by some folks who had more or less done one of the family trees of mine. Yes, and they took me there to find Kate's grave, which right through my childhood I'd heard my parents allude to a Kate, and I knew nothing else about her, what she was, or what she'd done. And these two had more or less the story of Kate, who lived in Dorchester, and yes, at Genges, which still stands, there's Genges marked in the above one of the doors there. That's still there, but my grandfather had a shop opposite there on the corner, a confectioner's shop, and they lived above it. And he married a woman who was, I never knew my grandmother, and just as well I think, she sounds to be a bit of a so-and-so. In fact, she was. And he had two sons, my father and my uncle, and one girl, Kate. And I used to hear right through my childhood, he'd look at me and he'd say, "Poor Kate, how like you are." And that's all I knew. Didn't know till these other folks came. And actually, they contacted my sister in Bedminster by the name of Bugler, and they just wondered if there was any connection. Well, of course it was. And they told the story of Kate then, that a young man had come opposite, learning the trade there, and they'd fallen for each other, and that a child was on the way, and they weren't married. And of course, in those days, it was not done. And grandmother had concealed it from Dorchester. When the child was born, she was taken to Weymouth. And I think for the burial there was a Came halt then, and the coffin was taken off at Came. And she was buried on Christmas Day, when nobody would be in the cemetery at Dorchester down Weymouth Road. I was told this story, and I went with these two to the graveyard. She was buried in a pauper's grave. At that time, without a stone to say who she was. And when we got there was a stone there, and it had been there for some long time. But I'll never forget, afterwards, I said to these two, I said, "Have you ever seen Maiden Castle?" No, they didn't know anything about it. Well, I said, "It's just up the road there." I said, "If you'd like to see it, well, I'll stay in the car." And they were gone a very long time. When they came back, they said to us, "That is far more interesting than Stonehenge." I've never forgotten that. Then I said, "Well, have you seen Momby Ruins?" Oh, they passed by it and didn't even know what it was. There was no notice to say that. So that's all that Dorchester advertises, the history it's got. I mean, it has a wonderful history.
Yeah, of course.
And then all that, they took down notices. I know my husband took a photograph of it, saying what you can, it's a Roman town and everything to do with what they could see. They took that down and put down on road trees instead. I had a jolly good go at one of the councillors too, a little way back. It was a WI meeting I'd been invited to. And she had no end of slides, and all her talking was, this was there, and that's what's there now. I went to sleep through some of it. When I woke up again, she was still knocking Dorchester down. In fact, they had to stop her. And then afterwards, I started to approach her, and she said, "I know who you are." I thought, Battle Royal. And I don't know what I said now, but I just about spoke what I thought Dorchester ought to do. Oh dear, and I ended up by saying, I walked away, I said, "You'll ruin Dorchester," and left her. Oh, she started on Weymouth as well, and they had to stop her. I had cancer myself in '79, I nearly died then. So I'm naturally trying to help those who are unfortunate not to suffer from it. And there's an awful lot of it around still.
Yes.
But in those days, you were just home, the telephone went, it's arranged to take you to Poole Hospital the next morning at a certain time. That's how quick it was then.
Yeah.
But it isn't now. No.
Do you ever go to the hospice yourself?
Yes, I did. When it started, I started with it. And it was then in Edward Road, in
Dorchester.
Caravan.
Okay.
That's how they started. And actually it was a doctor's wife who put some pamphlets round Dorchester suggesting, you know, they would like to have help and so on. And they would train some folks to help. And I thought, well, I do know something about cancer now, I could help. And I helped with them for about 8 years after that. I actually went round with people here in the village, and there was an awful lot of cancer cases in the village then. Don't know if it's anything to do with the station that shut down or not. But I would stay and be with them and let them talk. And well, you can do that for a certain time, and then there comes a time when you know you cannot do any more. And I began writing some little books, and there was they managed to print it and so on, and I would give the money from that to the hospice after that. And from that rose my own book gradually. And through those books, strangely enough, it went to various people, and the people, some of them were semi-related. And I got the story, the whole story of my family history all the way around, mother and father. Yes, that was an amazing thing to happen. Because I didn't know much about beyond my father and mother. But there were lots of family troubles and quarrels and heaven knows what, which came to light. Yes. Yes, and every 2 years I would be down there. Oh yes, that little photograph there, that is myself at one. I dressed up as Florence Nightingale and sold the books. Yeah. Yes, we had lots of fun and games with that.
So how long ago was that?
Mm.
When was that taken?
Oh dear. In the 60s. Yes. Yes, it must have been. Good Lord, how much changed. I don't want to look at that. I had a shock to see myself on television. I really did.
You look lovely.
You just sort of imagine yourself not looking as old as that anyway. Cool.
So one thinks of oneself as a teenager, practically. You do still think of yourself as a teenager, really, at heart?
Well,
Not quite.
certainly a little younger than I look at the moment.
You
Yes.
look wonderful, Norrie.
Yes, you do.
No, it was, no, I did have a shock when I saw myself on television. So I'll say you can't see yourself, and I certainly don't like being photographed much. But even then, I mean, I've changed a lot. That's taken down on the village because there's a lot of thatch.
Yes.
Yes, they used to have the Morris dancers there, you know, and it's just lovely setting for the village.
Was there ever a pub in the village?
No,
No.
so it's not likely to grow all that much. It's still growing to some extent, because now there is no school there. The school has recently moved across ways, and there's no pub. And the powers that be, they want both. And then the village goes bigger and bigger and bigger. Because they had a village appraisal, and I put down for about increase of 2 houses. Yes, but No, I'm quite glad really that the school has moved, because at least it'll save the village from being destroyed.
Mm.
Because it is a pretty little village. And I know I've read Sir Frederick Treves in his book, he calls it the Forgotten Village. It's not forgotten now, but it was. I can remember it when it was just a few houses down here, and the houses on one side going up to the church, and that was all.
Yeah.
So it has increased quite a lot, but now it's lost its core, fortunately. I don't think we shall suffer quite so badly, at least I hope not. They do have, they build extra houses, but so far it's been in keeping,
Yes.
especially down the Church Lane. They used to call it Parsons Lane, but they've got a wonderful old rectory down there. Actually, during the war, the cellar was used as the only air raid shelter. It had two exit and entrance. And there's also wood from the Spanish Armada, the ships there. Because I know the ones who lived there, and of course in Victorian times they improved the church. In other words, they spoiled it, but the tower is still there. And the book that Hardy wrote, you know, on the village, called it Nether Moynton, you can imagine, I've never been on top of the tower because I don't like heights, but in it you have the people in the book looking down on the folks looking for the whiskey cask everywhere, and you can just imagine it as he describes it, and everything in that book, it is there. Even to Lulworth, Lolland, and the Warmore Cross. And you can really go along the roads, a bit wider of course, and trace the whole of that book. And I know there was a lady thought she bought the book, and she thought that she lived in a place where the heroine lived. And I said, I'm sorry to have to tell you, but you don't. I said, the house next door was where it, which is quite a big house and stone built and so on. But she lives in a lovely thatched cottage. And because it was thatched, I suppose she thought that was it, but it wasn't. No, but I don't know whether we should do that one day.
You may do.
But whether it's one of his shorter stories, a long short story, isn't it?
Yeah.
But whether there's enough left in that for a play, I don't know.
Oh, probably. Short play.
Mm.
Yeah. No reason
Well,
why
you
not.
could put little bits
Put
in,
short
couldn't
ones.
you? So there's another funny story of my father. He imagined himself quite old in his 80s. And the last rector of Ormoyne came up to see him, and he was boasting about his age in the 80s. And the rector said, you must be the ancient monument of Ormoyne then, mustn't you? Oh dear. Yes. And now, of course, it's no longer a rectory.
Is it not, no?
No. There's one lady preacher, looks to 5, is it? Yeah, it's 5 churches.
Really? Oh.
Yeah. You used to have a resident rector there. Of course, in the village, we do boast of one of the 4 oldest houses in Dorset. The Crees live in the manor house. and there is one part. They've added on, Victorians added on another part, but the other part goes back nearly to Norman times. And it still is there. I think, well, the whole village then belonged to the Moyne family, and hence the name. When I came here, I went down to a village New Year's thing, and the village schoolmistress came up to me and she said, "Careful who you talk to here." She said, "They're all related." I said, "I think I've already dropped a few bricks." And they were, and what was more, they spoke the Dorset dialect. See, then, the farming hadn't changed as it's changed now. And a lot of them worked on the land. And the wages were so low that they never got out of the place they were born in. And I mean, Granny taught Dorset dialect, so they learned from Granny. And I remember one little boy who'd been brought up by Granny, he said, "You see the ripe over there?" I thought, "What on earth?" he said. I said, "How, where?" He said, "That one over there." Oh, it was a mole heap. But he really was Dorset. But a lot of it's going now, and we try to revive it, don't we?
Yes.
It's supposed to be the nearest to the Anglo-Saxon, actually.
Is it really?
Dorset
Yes.
dialect, yeah. That's what we.
Well, have you really heard the, I don't, well, when I give the maid, I mean, I don't think people hear it, or understand it,
No.
because it is in Dorset, it's all Dorset dialect entirely.
Mm.
I remember doing it at the museum in Dorchester a year or two ago, after a lecture, and I was waiting at the entrance there for a car to pick me up. And a voice came out of the darkness, and he said, "I did enjoy what you did tonight." And I was so taken back. I said, "Well, did you understand the Dorset dialect?" He said, "No, but I enjoyed the way you did it. That was worth coming for." Didn't say much for the lecture, did it? Never forgotten that. I don't know who he was to this day.
Oh, Amelia, my dear, if this don't every crowd, oh, just suppose I meet you in town. Where's the tribe garments? Such prosperity. Oh, did you know I've been ruined to such You left us in tanners. We haven't shooting yourselves. Tired of digging takers and spotting up dogs. But now you gave bracelets and bright feathers. Yes, that's how we dress when we're ruined, said she. At home in the park, you said thee and thou, and thickum and that and t'other. But now, you're talking right pixie for high company. Some polish is gained by one's ruin, said she. Your arms were like Paul's then, your face blue and bleak. But now I'm bewitched by the dead of the cheek. And your little glove state is on every lady. Some polish is gained by one's ruin, said she. You used to call one life a handwritten dream, when you'd sigh and you'd sock. But at present, you seem not to know of meagres or melancholy. True, one's pretty lively when ruined, said she. I wish I had fine feathers, a fine sweeping gown, and a delicate face, and could strut about town. My dear, a raw country girl, such as you be, could hardly expect that. You ain't ruined, said she.
Well, that's it. I acted it rather than just said it.
And that
And I think that's what I enjoyed, really. Because I have heard some members of the Hardy Society, I have heard one of them give it. And from then onwards I thought, well, I'll try and improve on it. I think I have a bit. No, I've always been fascinated with Cork. I've never seen it as a happy place. It's a place of horror. But it's a marvellous view when you get on top.
Yeah.
Bit of a climb, but I don't think I'll get up there now. But to my mind now, the view of Cork, it doesn't stand out so much. The trees have grown up somehow. But at one time when you went there, it stood out between the two hills like that. And I've always called it the gateway to the Purbecks. And somebody said, I never heard it described as that. Well, I said, to me, that's what it looks like. And I think it's a correct description, too. In Dorchester, I remember seeing the Roman baths before they buried it. And if they'd had any sense, the councillors then, they could have made it into a miniature bath, because I'm in the other end of the town. There's the Roman villa, which is nearly perfect of its kind, and they've just let that go to rack and ruin. Not even a sign to say where it was. Now I believe they're trying to do something to it. But there's very few Roman villas around like that.
Very few.
But you hear of the finds, and then you hear nothing else. They don't know anything about it.
No.
But the latest one at Charles Street, unless they change it again, they've got a firm who has more or less been in contact with historical cities. So I'm just hoping that something might come of that. What I think is they ought to do something about the traffic that's going right through. I remember writing a very sharp letter to the Echo, and they printed it. I just said, there is a bypass, why isn't it used? But you get the traffic. Well, I stood there for about 5 minutes one day, and I began to feel sick. The fumes of the car right down through. I went round an old square to get out of it. I mean, that street is, what shall I say, well, it's got Judge Jeffreys and Tolful Martyrs. It's got history right down through, and a very old cottage at the top, which is a restaurant, tea place now. But I mean, they have retained that. They haven't knocked that down so much. Not so much as South Street. But they still let the cars go down. I mean, they're polluting the buildings all the time. And it's just murder to get through that town, isn't it?
It is.
It's very, very quiet. No, it is a very, very noisy world now. I've never been in an aeroplane. I never want to.
No?
No. I had my father to look to as well. And he would go off with a gun, and you never knew where he was with a gun. And he'd leave a gun against a wall, loaded. And I know a near neighbour came down, he said, "Good God," he said, "it's loaded." Yeah, oh yes. I don't know why he didn't shoot himself getting over the edge, it was quite on. Oh, he did shoot across the road there, and there were a few airmen walking down. They came in and dressed him down. But he still, no. Oh no, he was quite a character, really. No.
And not a great driver.
Oh, driving a car, oh, that was another funny bit. After I'd been taught by a professional, he didn't pass tests then. He kept on telling me how to drive. So my mother intervened and said to leave her alone, she's had lessons. Oh, dear. Yes, that was funny. But it wasn't funny at the time, because you didn't know what he was going to do next. Of course, he'd been used to driving horses way back. And a horse and a car is a bit different. Yes, but he meant well all the same. I came to a house called Warwiga, which still stands. And then Dick of the Banks was Crossways. There was nothing else there. There's plenty there now. Yes, and there was an airfield there. I remember seeing them, well, for one thing, seeing them come down here. But the very beginning of the war, that rather frightened me. They came from over that way, straight down into the aerodrome, and put on their landing lights. And, you know, looking up and never having seen a plane before, you wonder what on earth was happening. I thought they were going to blow up or something. I didn't know what they were going to do. And one Sunday afternoon, it was the first time I heard a siren. And I had an uncle living there then, and he said, "Oh, you better come into the shelter." I said, "Well, I better lock the car first," hadn't I? As I got down, and the first bomb came down. And they flattened what was then the airfield. And that was early on in the war, of course. And I honestly don't know why to this day, but at the end of, when it had really finished, I suppose, I stood up and I said, "We better sing God Save the King now." And I got out to see what damage might be done, because I had joined the ARP, so it was my duty to do that. And we had formed that and in the village, because we belonged to the village. I didn't know whether I belonged to Crossways or the village then, but I found out it was the village in the end. Yes, it was a rather hectic day. I remember a retired admiral was there. And when I got to the road, there was a crater right down there, and it was beginning to fill with water. And he more or less took charge. So I said to the poor folks who'd lost their home, I said, "You're welcome to come down to my home." I said, "If it's still there, I don't know." And when I got down there was a lot of people here. But you gradually got them to where they could go and all that sort of thing. But it was very, well, I won't say exciting days, it was very, I don't know how to describe it, because you never knew when there was another coming, because this aerodrome up here was quite important for Portland, and they certainly attacked Portland quite a bit.
They bombed the chicken sheds.
Oh
You-
yes,
you
that,
went
I
flat
went
down,
down
didn't you?
flat that time. Chicken just went on as usual, something like that. Yes, because it was taken over by the Americans halfway through the war. And when there were raids on it, you could hear them shouting right up there. You could hear them as plain as anything shouting down here. The beginning of the war, when our own men were there, one of the raids, they were told to get out of the place altogether because there was a lot of delayed action bombs there. And I had this room full of them, all sleeping on the floor. I remember opening a little window there, and it was November, I think, and the wind blew. You know, they were in an absolute state of shock after what they'd been through. And they said, oh, I said, well, it's only the window. I've only opened the window. Because I mean, it's getting a bit warm. Yes. But you never knew what was going to happen next day then. You really didn't. The county council ran a thing then for, some of the best stock to be kept. And I know I came across it the other day, a form I signed to be in the Land Army in 1938 before the war started. I thought pretty certain it was going to happen. And then I wasn't called up because my farm was one farm they wanted to be kept, you see. I'd had a much easier time in the Land Army, I think. Yes. No, it wasn't easy. The food question and so on, I mean, the contents of the feeding stuff became so poor that, well, they just didn't lay the number of eggs they should have done. Oh yes, and I'll tell you a funny story about that. Of course, it was under these so-called officials. And you had to fill in forms, the numbers you had and so on, and for food allocation. And he said, put another O on that. And I said, but, he said, you do as I say. He said, you've got some very good stock here, much better than a lot of people. It went against my conscience to do that. But it kept the chicken going, more or less. Then there was a time when you bought potatoes by the ton. And you know potatoes will grow out very soon, and those tubers are poisonous to poultry. So you sat down and you had a boiler thing here ready to cook the potatoes. And you sat down and you spend hours there getting the tubers off before you could cook. And then it only ended up with making the blessed chicken fat, because potatoes are very fattening. And just kept them alive, that's all it was at one time really, it's just keeping them alive, especially in the winter. No, it was no fun being a chicken farmer, I tell you.
Did you eat chicken?
No. And I don't eat pheasant either, because at the beginning of the war, there was one of the big houses up the Lord's Crossways, and they reared pheasants. Well, there's no allocation of food for them. They were all turned out. My father had a lovely time. But he would hang these wretched pheasants till they had maggots coming out. I never wanted a pheasant since. Oh. That was horrible. Yes, and I remember he shot a rabbit once. And it was only about that long. We thought it was a young one. When I cooked it, oh my goodness, I should think it was a grandfather. Oh, that rabbit. I've never wanted rabbits since. When they put on the hours to 2 hours instead of 1, and it meant I couldn't go to bed till 12 o'clock at night. Because if you didn't shut all the poultry in, and I had 4 great big houses, if you didn't shut them in, you wouldn't find them there in the morning. Well, you would, without heads. And another thing in Dorchester, my father had a garden there, and he kept a pig. out in the middle of Dorchester. And often it used to be down there stroking the pig's ears when he should have been in the business. Yes, that garden is now built on, I think there's a garage there now, I think it is. But he always fancied himself as a farmer. I don't think he made a very good one myself. No.
But because I wasn't sure if it was your father who had wanted to get the chicken farm or you.
Well, my father bought it.
For himself?
And he was crafty, really, because that kept me home. Otherwise, I'd have been called up. As it worked out for him very well. But sometimes in life, things happen like that, don't they? Something comes up at maybe the right or the wrong time. But I really think I would have had a much easier life during the war. It wasn't easy. Because at times you had to send some pullets at a certain age off to domestic poultry keepers to keep the food question going. And you never knew whether it was going to get there or not on the rails then. And I remember I had a letter from one customer and said that the chicken had arrived safely. And they were such cheerful little chicken. I said I nearly renamed it the Cheerful Chicken Farm. Oh dear. You did get some funny letters, but and other times you were allowed a petrol ration to take the chicken to the customers round about here. But it was very difficult times. I'd like to go through that again. No. Then, of all things, he started on about Hardy. He's a miserable old so-and-so, and he couldn't say enough, so I just listened for a while. And then I said I happened to have known Thomas Hardy, and I said, what you're saying is entirely untrue. And I gave him a bit of a lecture, I must say, and he disappeared. It was a hotel.
Yes.
Underneath was a shop and a bakery and dining rooms where the Hardy players held their rehearsals.
Because your sister was the first person to...
Oh, I saw her acting through a little hole in the curtain.
Mm.
So I grew up with the Hardy players from 13 onwards.
And how did your sister get involved with them?
Oh, Harry Tilley, who was producing the plays with Hardy, he spotted her playing Orlando, I think it was an old man, in As You Like It, in a school play. And he thought she had acting abilities. And he suggested that she did Marty South. And she stole the honours from the leading lady, actually. From then onwards, they did Scene from the Dentist, and Hardy wrote in a little play for her, The Waiting Maid, and I can remember hearing her sing, My Love's Gone A-Fighting. Can't remember anymore, but it was a very, very small part. And then in 1918, when the First World War ended, they did Under the Greenwood Tree, only it wasn't the Greenwood Tree, it was Mellstock Choir. And from then onwards, there was nearly a Hardy play every year, till Mrs. Hardy ended them in 24. But he did tell himself on one occasion, he said that he must have seen my mother at Bockhampton milking a cow, and that sort of put into his mind Tess. And it was a strange sort of reincarnation, because my mother, her daughter became Tess.
Yes.
And he must have seen her because when he was quite young, he used to go to Kingston Morwood. And my grandfather ran a dairy from the house, and he would pass by that every day. And that's how Tess came into circulation, as it were. Hardy had no wish to go to a dress rehearsal because the press would be there. He didn't like the press at all, you know, being shy and being asked and all that sort of thing. He really did not like. And we went there just before Tess was produced in Dorchester, because I was in the play before, but I don't think they ever did that. I don't know. Anyway, he requested that we should rehearse in front of him, not in costume, but just rehearse to let him see the play he'd written. And it was a bit difficult at Matsgate. We only had one entrance. And the Hardys, Mrs. Hardy was there. She sat next to him, and there's a little alcove there. It's been enlarged since, but it was quite small then. They sat there, and we went right through the play, and absolute silence. He never said a word, never stopped anything. And right at the end, well, I was just 16 and very shy in case I did something wrong, you know, and I more or less glued to my chair. But he beckoned to me to come over to him. And then he said, I haven't given Liza Lou much to say, have I? Well, he hadn't, because all I had to do was to rush across the stage, throw my sister, and throw my arms all around my sister, and say, oh, Tess, Tess, and that was all. So he asked for my script, and he wrote down, I'm so glad you've come home. And then he looked at me and he said, that's better, isn't it? And I felt very, very honoured to think that he'd even thought of anything. But there was, we had a prompter who was certainly not Dawson, rather pleased with himself. And he started a lecture, Hardy, there in front of us at the rehearsal. And he loved his own voice, and he went on and on and on. He didn't think the play was going to be a success. The church people certainly wouldn't want to go up there in a moral play, a moral book, and he went on, and then somewhat repeated himself and said it all over again. And then Hardy just looked up and he said, don't you, Mr. Dawson? And that's all he said. But he did have another actor who took d'Urberville, a very, what shall I say, self-assured bank clerk. And he was invited to Matsgate several times for the simple reason that he was not doing it as Hardy wanted it. And he kept on, Hardy kept on to him. But he still did it his own way, and it was pretty awful. I mean, both of the men's parts in Tess are very difficult to put over. But the other one who took Angel Clare, he was a doctor, and he really put it over well, although some of the press suggested otherwise, but I thought he was excellent, considering it was a very difficult part. And of course, in the Corn Exchange, I went to the Corn Exchange not long ago, and I had a bit of a shock. There's no stage there now. No curtains. And the whole point was, at the end of tests, the curtains had to come down when she's at Stonehenge. And she is just standing and says, I am ready. Well, you can't do that with a modern stage. Well, my sister, they were putting on tests in London, and it had been agreed that Gertrude would go to London and play tests with professionals. And Mrs. Hardy became insanely jealous, and I would say insane. And she went down to Bedminster, where my sister lived then, because she was married, and had her one child, and begged her not to go to London, that her husband would want to go up, and there would be more unkind things said. And she went on and on and on till at long last she prevailed on my sister to promise to write the letter. And she didn't go to London. And Thomas Hardy again said that he thought she would have been the best one to have gone. But there are letters again. I came across in the museum. I didn't know I was in his letters. But he is suggesting, that's before my sister had gone, that I went up with her, company. That letter is actually there, written in the museum. And I didn't know till not very long ago that it existed. He called her the impersonator at death. And he actually gave her some signed books, which are now in America. Tests had to be played to extra houses, and they had half of London down to see him. And because they were friendly then with James Barry and all of those sort of folks. And Hardy himself said he thought that perhaps she shouldn't go to London. London should come down to see her. And I think they did at that time.
Gosh.
Yes. No, it was...
He was pleased with the production then?
Oh yes, definitely a great success. And when Franklin Davis took the part, which she would have done, but it was a wicked thing to do, really. Well, I remember we went to Hull Manor just before Tess was produced in Dorchester, and what they called the confession scene was done there in front of a very fireplace which he imagined when he wrote Tess. And he was there to see it. And I think that particular time was the best she ever did of that scene, because it's intensely dramatic. And there was dead silence afterwards. There was later on with the audience, because the curtain would come down and my sister would be sobbing her heart out. And she got over to the audience. The audience just remained quiet and then realised, you know, that they had enjoyed it and clapped. But that happened, what's it, 4 or 5 times in the Cornet Exchange. It's intensely, well, I mean, it requires a good actress to do that. And she could get over it. Some people can't get over in tragedy, but she definitely could. No doubt about that. And I often think it's It was really dreadful that she didn't go to London. Just through one woman's complete jealousy, absolutely unfounded. No, I can't forgive Mrs. Hardy for her behaviour. And what was in her distorted mind was absolutely wrong. She imagined everything under the earth. Well, it's a shame he never knew it. But the more I think, and the more I read of Hardy, of some of his later books, the more I think that he had 2 unhappy marriages. I'm quite certain of that. But there again, I mean, would he have written the poetry if he hadn't? Because his poetry is not very happy at times.
It was quite a different style of acting in those days to nowadays.
Yes, you had to learn to throw your voice like that and to speak slowly. Because the corn exchange, the acoustics there were terrible. I mean, the corn exchange, it was built for agricultural purposes. And in those days they used it as a, well, I think Dorchester ought to be ashamed of itself for not having a theatre. Smaller towns, I've seen a theatre there, but not in Dorchester. Tell me when I did something or another in the museum, they put, they can use those to make it easier, but I know we didn't have that. We simply had to get our voices over. And they would go right to the end of the hall, and an empty hall at that, which was rather funny, and say if they could hear us or not. But I think an empty hall and a hall full of people, I think the sound was rather different.
Who directed you in the
Mr.
production?
Tilley was the, yes.
The one
He
who,
used to be very often at Marysgate. Mrs. Harder used to say, "Dear Mr. Tilley." I think he was the only one she approved of.
Yeah.
Yes, but no, Hardy would, I mean, it was part of his life, really. And it must have been a great joy to see him, to see what he'd written, and partly dramatised with Mr. Tilley, to come to life in front of his eyes.
and what was Mr. Tilley like as a
Oh.
person?
As a child, I can remember he used to pull the funniest of faces across the stage, make us all laugh. He's a very clever man. Unfortunately, he's left no records. But he was a very nice, a very clever man. He used to act in it as well, and he took the part of Thomas Leaf, and he had the house rocking. He really was a natural actor and a very funny one. But I remember his wife was the one troublemaker. You always get him. Scared stiff of her, and first of all, and she started on me. I can't remember what it was about, but some of the others came to me and said, "Don't get worried about her. She's always trouble wherever she goes." And I felt a bit happier after that. No, she would make mischief wherever she was. But he, as I said, he was a very, very nice man. Again, he didn't deserve to have a wife like that, I don't think. No.
Did you see Thomas Hardy after the production of the play at all, or did he? I know he became.
It was closed right down in 1924
Mm-hmm.
by Mrs. Hardy.
Right.
Did you see Hardy after that, Norrie?
No.
No.
He was
No.
being besieged by the famous people from London,
Well, I think they had a lot of people they had to sort of try and get rid of. I believe they did. But, I mean, he became ill. And he wasn't a strong man by any means. And I have read it, he had to stay in bed for quite a while, which of course he wouldn't do these days. No.
You didn't know Emma, did you?
Oh.
Emma Hardy, you didn't know Emma Hardy?
Oh no, I'm not that old.
No. When I said it, I realised the date.
No. No, I do remember my mother saying that she rather shocked Dorchester because she was riding on a bike with bloomers on. I remember mother saying, you know, rather disgusting voice. I don't know what her costume was, but I do remember that.
She became a bit unbalanced in her mind, didn't she?
Yes, she did.
Which was sad.
Yes. She thought she could write, you see. Yes, and not only that, she let down her husband again and again. But when they were in publicity, in public places, you know, she would downgrade him. No, well, I suppose at Dorchester she would be more or less a foreigner. And I remember seeing the Prince of Wales going down with Thomas Hardy down South Street, and my mother quite fell in love with his lovely golden hair. He's looking bored stiff, actually, I thought. I don't know what poor Thomas Hardy said to the Prince, because obviously he wouldn't have read any of his books, would he?
No, that's right, that's right.
Wonder what they really did talk about. I don't expect Hardy said much.
A lot of the tales about Hardy came from gossip from the servants, didn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Somebody actually printed a book.
And then there was a man came to Bedminster and started doing things on Hardy. And for a while my sister went with him, and then she realised he was doing a lot of damage. And she wouldn't have any more to do with him. But he would go to people like the servants there, his barber, well, he never said a word to his barber, he wouldn't. Anybody like that. And that's gradually grown up, that view of Hardy, which I've been trying to, at Mount's Gate, trying to tell people that he was shy. But, and they, you know, a lot of those people seemed very surprised when I said that. Genuinely surprised. I think he was a shy man, which he most certainly was. I mean, the only thing he accepted was Order of Merit. He could have accepted many other things if he wanted, but he didn't want to go to that trouble, did he? No. Yeah. He seemed such a little man to me, because he wasn't very tall, was he?
No, he
No.
wasn't. Well, but average, I suppose.
No. Yes. I was at that funeral, yes, when they buried his heart, but that was right against his wishes. You know, at the funeral, everybody was in black. Looked like a lot of blackbirds going about.
I think the important people are in London, aren't they?
Hardy, as a person, was shy,
Yeah.
you would say. So,
But he's very thoughtful for others. Yes.
and quiet.
Yes, very. Well, country-born people, they're used to their own company. I know a lot of country people. I myself, I don't mind being alone. Not a bit. It's got to be now, but... yeah. After all, going back to his life, he used to go to Kingston Morwood, and the lady of the house was helping him because she realised that there was something unusual in him. He was a shy little boy. And I don't think once you are shy, I don't think you ever really get over it. You are a naturally shy person. And I think you remain that your whole life. I mean, there have been books written about Hardy. What shall I say? Not quite correct. But I think now they're beginning to realise that he was a shy man. They put everything else. I think really they have nearly destroyed the real Hardy. But I think now, hopefully, with the Hardy players as well,
Yes.
we'll get that over.